So this next chapter is on something called social information processing and hyper personal relationships. And so let me do this. Let me shoot the screenshot. Why don't you guys pop your cameras on and I'll shoot the screenshot. All right. Yeah, very good. Yeah, got it. Now, let me share my screen and then we can go into this presentation. Okay, can you guys see that? Computer mediated communications, approaches and perspectives. We're on chapter 8. And you know, the last chapter on propinquity, that's kind of like, you know, the start of the discussion around relationships. But this chapter gets into a little bit more, you know, more detail as to how certain platforms enable relationships to develop. And you know, like anything, we're talking about the whole range of platforms, you know, from text to full, you know, video conferencing like Zoom. Okay, so how do these relationships kind of develop, you know, in those on those different platforms? And then, you know, there's terms like social penetration and uncertainty reduction. So we'll talk a little bit about what exactly does that all mean. So, you know, when we talk about these relationships, it's like when we interact with people, it's sort of a natural thing for humans to form some kind of relationship. Now, this is a conscious thing, and sometimes, you know, you want to form a relationship. Sometimes you decide you don't want to form a relationship because that other person is not someone that you would necessarily want to connect up with. So this whole idea of a relationship, this determines whether you come together or decide not to come together. And so what are some of the things that impact those decisions? So as people start to better know each other, you know, there's some basic stuff like, you know, the demographic. You have personal preferences for demographics, age, sex, whatever. You have social preferences, right? So people might have ideas of social classes. There may be goals and aspirations that will determine whether you want to have a relationship, right? Develop a relationship. You have these hopes, anxieties, beliefs. You have personal self-concepts. These are all things that you, as a person, I guess, have kind of internally, and then it impacts your interest in maybe forming a relationship. So this is just a diagram of, you know, how you at the center, you have this self-concept, and then how do these concentric rings interact at the different levels and layers that ultimately decide or drive your decision for, you know, this relationship building. So interpersonal uncertainty, and how do you you know, reduce that? And some of the examples, you know, that I would kind of think of as I read through, you know, the chapter is like, you know, if you're not really sure of who the other person is, you're picking up cues by reading their texts or looking at perhaps facial expressions or looking at reactions that they might have, as a result of the communications that you're conducting. And so what you're doing is sort of seeking information to help you anticipate a future relationship, or it helps you determine whether there's something that you want from that person. And then you might, in the process, find the person interesting or threatening, which would determine whether you want to, get closer or steer away. And the third bullet, otherwise there's no real motivation to reduce the uncertainty. In other words, some of these things that you're seeking information on may decide or may draw the conclusion in your mind that it's not something worth really pursuing. So there's no interest in building a closer relationship. So you're not motivated to reduce that uncertainty. And then that's another way of saying you have no need to find out more. So these reduction strategies, and this is, how do you reduce that uncertainty? So the 4 strategies are, if you approach it passively, right, you just kind of like quietly watch these interactions. And I'm sure you've all been in kind of group settings, and you might, hear others speaking, and you can sort of gauge the way it sounds, the way they carry themselves. Those are cues that you will have that kind of help build your sense of like who are these people, right? So that's kind of a passive approach. Then there's a more active approach where you might ask somebody about someone, right? So you want to find out more, and then you ask somebody to give you some information. And in business, that happens quite often. I don't think there's a day that goes by where, somebody is describing a situation that they're in, and it involves some people, and perhaps those people or you don't know, and you will ask, if there's any other information about that person that they could share, so that you could get a better sense as to why that person is the way they are. So that's sort of actively trying to find out. There's this, the interactive, which is engaging with the person in conversation. So as you engage, you can find out, and that engagement is direct, between you and that person. And then the fourth one is extractive. So let's say you wanted to find out about a person, but you didn't necessarily do the first 3, but you could Google, you could Google the person, which I oftentimes do, right? I might see somebody doing a video talk, and this happened kind of recently. They gave a video talk, and the talk was pretty interesting. So I would kind of Google the person's name and kind of find out, like, where do they work? How did they get the perspective that they got? And that gives you a little bit more information. And part of this uncertainty reduction is, I might tap them to perhaps be a guest speaker for our class, or maybe, I'll get them to be a participant in the broadband hootie or something. So, that's kind of the extractive approach. And this goes into a little bit more detail, about each one of those strategies. So passive strategies, casually observe person in social settings. So observe as a person interacts and reacts to others. Observe person interacting with others, so you can draw conclusions or comparisons of similarities to friends. watch person when less inhibited, less affected by social norms. And these are oftentimes, like could be in a social setting. And then you got these active strategies. Seek relevant information from another person, ask others about the person, select or change environment, observe a person in a different, unfamiliar setting. So you got these interactive strategies, engaging in a conversation with that person, asking direct questions, kind of verbal interrogation. And oftentimes, again, there's the face-to-face as the gold standard for interaction. And then as this chapter kind of goes on, how do you apply these to the different computer-mediated environments? Listen for self-disclosure of information. Whenever you're talking to somebody, you kind of always want to hear, like this self-disclosure. Is it coming at a level that's honest, right? How do you really pick up the cues that tell you what is being said is an honest kind of reflection of the person that's saying it. Watch for these hedges or enhancements or distortions or evasive responses, omissions and falsifications. These are always challenging, but if you are at least aware of it, right, you can kind of like not only sense it, but maybe you're more sensitive to it. So it's something that probably is something to develop a sensitivity or a practice or a awareness of. And then these extractive uncertainty reduction strategies. So read newspaper accounts or look up information about a person, like look it up on Google, search public records, library, internet, other sources of information about the person. Pretty straightforward. So the social information processing, in CMCs, so you have this, active, passive, interactive strategies. In computer-mediated communications, right? We don't oftentimes have just verbal cues. You have nonverbal cues, and these are things like emojis and various ways of providing some more information about what it is that you're trying to convey. I'll give you an example. One of the folks that we work with, I guess, got an email from another fellow, and they called me up and said, "Hey, Bert, can you explain what this email means?" And I kind of proceeded to explain, and then they kind of intimated that they thought maybe the writer of the email was angry at them, and depending on how you frame your sentences and how you project your message can give the receiver on the other end the impression that you're angry, or could be condescending, or could seem like I don't know, how would you say it, like not authoritarian, but being very sort of directive and maybe forceful. And so that might be giving a sense of kind of a hierarchical relationship, in the way the communication is coming across. Again, like, an example would be from a boss to a subordinate, right? And that's simply through a way of how a sentence might be structured. And then that's why these emojis are kind of a key application, because if you have a sentence that seems somewhat condescending, or perhaps even angry, but then you end it with a smiley face, then it changes the whole kind of environment. So I wanted to bring that example up because those are non-verbal cues. And then many of these CMCs, they'll filter out the non-verbal cues. So text, email, there aren't any verbal cues. But humans are motivated by, information. They're naturally information seekers. So they're gonna try to figure out like what is the sender actually meaning, and that's why I brought up that example where they weren't sure, so they ended up calling me up. So you got these information seekers, and because all of these platforms are easily accessible, freely to use, you're not limited to just using Zoom or Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. You can use anything you want, right? So you adapt a strategy, and the medium could be a variety of different kinds of mediums. Use available cues, substitute missing information, and that's why I think that example of the emoji is kind of seems like it seems like a somewhat trivial, but you'd be surprised how it might lighten a message if you add an emoji at the end of it, right? So now I kind of realize, at the beginning when emojis started to roll out, I thought, wow, this kind of seems a little not childish, but like almost comic book like. But I realized that there is definite communication value in a lot of these emojis, especially like in text, right? You might get a thumbs up or you might get a heart. I mean, it actually kind of feels good. It feels different than just pure text. So verbal content replaces non-verbal information. So again, verbally, you pick up a lot of information, and so in these non-verbal environments, there's other things that need to be considered in terms of communicating your message. So these alternative strategies, accessing information in CMC can take more time, and I guess you could think of it like if you're emailing somebody and there's information that's being conveyed over email, but then there's a question that perhaps needs a little bit of explaining, you might go to a verbal explanation, and that is not only sometimes easier, but it also conveys more information. So again, if you stuck to email, that would take more time because you have to craft the email. And I'm amazed at people who can, type long texts because, if they're not doing it on their computer, they're basically typing with their thumbs, right? So that's pretty challenging. So how do these relationships form as a result of interacting, on the CMCs, and it's oftentimes different, than face to face. But fortunately, we have all of those to choose from. So whether you're developing the relationship via face to face or augmenting that with CMC, we have that available. The substitution of verbal expressions with emojis, we talked a little bit about that. Using interactive questioning, and again, in an email, I'll give you an example. It's one thing to talk to somebody and then kind of do some of that interactive questioning because you have their attention. But I noticed that, I'm not sure, I'm sure you guys have noticed this too, but if you email somebody and you ask them a question, you pretty much have to limit it to one question, because more often than not, if you ask them 3 questions in your email, they'll only answer the first one. So if you want to test that out, try it. If you ask somebody 3 questions, I bet you 9 times out of 10, they'll only answer the first one. And then access text-based language cues, and those are kind of like the emoticons, and which is like a precursor to emojis. So like any relationship, right? You gotta start slow and accumulate information. Social information in CMC mediums takes more time. There's the lack of the physical and the vocal cues slow the communications. Relationship processes remain the same. Ultimately, the thing that I think is important to note is that we're not just talking about one kind of CMC, right? We got all of them at our disposal, including face-to-face. So a lot of it is going to result in a relationship if one is so desired. These are just the tools that we use to achieve, how that relationship evolves and develops. CMC, social information gathering, starts slowly. Again, online, it's oftentimes just bits and pieces of information, but it happens pretty quickly, given the fact that there's more and more options to choose from. And this graph is just a quick look at, over time, you can still achieve a certain impression development. There's a higher sort of ramp up with face-to-face, but over time, it sort of gets to the same place in terms of the impression development. So this next part of the chapter is about hyper-personal relations. And hyper-personal is sort of taking that relationship to a more sort of closer. In this example, it's like intimacy, and this part of the chapter kind of references some of the like dating apps. So people seek being liked and approved by others. So there's this. Yes, I don't know. Maybe somebody in the class can speak to dating app. That's something I've never used because it was kind of before my time. But like anything, right, on social media, you want to present yourself in the most sort of strategic and maybe likable way. So that's like the strategic self-presentation. How do you present yourself that you maximize the approval rating? And then others interpret this to feel sort of like this relational closeness. So with the CMC environment, you have these tools and you have the ability to choose what it is that you want to share with people. So you end up curating, the best that you can to ultimately impress, the other people that you're trying to develop a relationship with. And then you want to also minimize the lack of contradictory information, which ultimately ruins credibility, if that were to be revealed, right? That something that you might have depicted on a dating app was actually false. That's pretty much it for credibility. idealized interpretations facilitate reciprocal intimacy. So again, these sort of dating environments, if there's a certain kind of projection that you're trying to make, you can pretty much bet that the other person on the other side of that is also projecting, some of those similar kind of qualities. Again, just a diagram of, how do these hyper personal relationships get fostered, especially, in a CMC environment, especially when you have kind of like both parties trying to present, the best version of themselves, but sometimes minimizing, the reality of their character. So this hyper-personal relationship cycle, this reciprocal process between two people, they're exchanging kind of basic information, but there's sort of like presenting yourself in the best way you think, and then the CMC provides this feedback process, and then there's the resulting sort of mutual attraction, and then the messaging, right, and then the reciprocal affirming, and encourages response with positive comments. So it sort of develops this cycle of acceptance, and then there's a spiral of positive messages, and it's a favorably interpreted. So hyperpersonal, both parties are interacting with the best presentation of their character, and it's reinforced by positive messages that then kind of get favorably interpreted. So then this cycle, you have this strategically edited, positively skewed, optimized self-presentation, and then you have the return path, idealized perception of communicator and relationship. So it's just a reinforcing kind of environment. But the thing that the chapter author also talks about is, especially in these dating apps, what happens. So the hyperpersonal misrepresentation, there's a concern for perfection. So this best presentation is always too good to be true. And so what happens when kind of like the truth comes out? So this example is the dating apps. So you have the self-presentation often constructed to, constructed in the best way, right, to present yourself. It's connected to real life. But the long-term relationship is less hyper-personal. And then the face-to-face will kind of make the dishonesty or any fallacies in the best presentation become very obvious, right? So then that starts to erode that sense of authentic relationship that was kind of constructed on a dating app or a CMC, as you now develop the relationship in a real life, kind of like face-to-face environment. So in hyperpersonal customer relations, and I like the fact that the book kind of brings it to some real world examples, like people who have jobs that are in the customer relations arena, how do they kind of like develop this sense of trust you know, from the company to the consumer or customer. So there's these stages, these 3 stages. You have credibility, trust, liking, favorable impression. Now, I will add to this that, whenever you're developing a relationship based on the potential for sale, right? It's a customer relationship, right? And there's always the end goal of making the sale. You got to be clear that that's ultimately the goal. And so any credibility, trust, liking is going to be tied to the fact that there's an agenda, and the agenda is to sell you something. And I can speak from firsthand experience that, there's a multitude of, especially in the work that I do, there's a multitude of vendors, and the vendors obviously want something, and the something that they want is a sale. And so they will be friendly and likable, and be very amenable to interaction. So you have to just be aware of that. And another one that you might also encounter is like a politician, right? A politician will always want something, and the something that they'll want is your vote. So you'll see especially during the kind of like the campaign season, they're very accessible, they're very friendly, they're very approachable, and you need to just be aware that the goal is to not necessarily be your friend. The goal is to get your vote. So just be aware of that. Language, immediacy, involvement, responsive, expectation of future interaction. So again, these are all motivations in this environment of customer relationship. Applying these hyper-personal kinds of tactics. So you have online presentations, positive profiles, photos, bio statements. The undesirable aspects are deleted. Nowadays when things on the internet go public and are searchable, it's hard to sort of deny some of the things that are undesirable. So you want to be very cognitive of what it is that you're putting out there, for public consumption. Meet face-to-face. Positive, negative experiences will result, in face-to-face. You have, these positive outcomes. You have, this is sort of like the example of an actual, I think, survey that resulted in these results. 2 fulfilled expectations with positive outcomes. There were 4 violated expectations, 3 negative outcomes, and 1 surprise. So this is a kind of the results of kind of a dating application, and then what happened after the face-to-face. Now, this idea of catfishing. Catfishing is sort of intentional misrepresentation. So, and this one, it's hard to determine whether it is, misrepresentation. So you have to be very cognitive of who's asking the question. I've been noticing a lot more texts coming to my cell phone, and some of them have pictures, and some of them are like in a foreign language, and I'm wondering, what what the heck is is this sort of messaging wanting to achieve. And I think at the baseline, what they're trying to achieve is whether there's somebody on the other end in the form of me, interested in actually responding. And oftentimes I won't respond. I get, like I said, I get messages that vary from pictures to foreign languages to things like, hey, I haven't seen you for a while. Let's go golfing this weekend. Like, who are these people? There's no identification of name. It's not in my contact list, so it doesn't come up with any name. I just delete them, and I mark them as either reporting spam or blocking. And I think if you guys encounter any of that, you should do the same. So it could be a catfishing attempt, and it may be an attempt just to see if somebody on the other end is responding. And if they do respond, if I did respond, they might respond with something else that tries to maintain some form of communications. And then ultimately their end goal is to see if they can extract some information. So anyway, be aware of these catfishing attempts. It could be an effort to develop this reciprocal relationship, and then when discovered, it might be hard to believe that you've been a victim. Okay, so don't even reply, just delete. So this sort of another sort of in practice example, CMC speed dating. The text-based video conference speed dating. Text-based is more socially attractive. Text-based more persistent attraction. These hyper-personal relationships, meeting face-to-face, reduce attraction, and text-based video conference both are pretty idealized. Okay, and so kind of in summary, the social social information processing and hyper-personal. The is not always a closer relationship. Hyper-personal, lack of nonverbal quickens the intensity, but then not necessarily a lasting thing. Hyper-personal does not slow how personal traits, messages, feedback affect a relationship information. And then in the social information process, asynchronous text-based CMC slows information of relationships. I mean, the end message here is that these are all tools that help any of us sort of develop information and develop an understanding of the person on the other end of that communication channel. At the end of the day, it still is going to result in how best you take that information, how best you use other forms of communication, especially face-to-face, to determine whether a relationship is something that you want to pursue. And so over time, like anything, right? It's as humans, it's a ever-changing kind of environment. And I guess I'll kind of end with the fact that, you may meet someone. In fact, I know some folks that actually met online and they ultimately got married. And they're actually still together. But again, it really depends on whether your relationship can stand the test of time through a face-to-face interaction that ultimately reveals, what it is that each person kind of presents themselves to that other person. And if it's real, then it's real. If it's not, it'll come out, and it might result in the relationship ending. So again, that's kind of like the cycle. And CMC does play a role in it, but it is not the end game. Ultimately, the end game is how does your relationship develop and foster and thrive in a face-to-face environment. So that's kind of like the chapter this week. Pretty straightforward. Any questions? Again, so now the quiz is basically the true and false and multiple choice. Those are only the two. Did I make them available? Yeah, they're available on Hugnella, and I'll post this video just later today. And then I've already posted the PowerPoint. Any questions? Julia, did you have a question?
Yeah, the speaker survey from last week assignment isn't posted for this week.
The chapter?
The speaker survey.
Oh, okay. I'll do that. I thought I did that, but maybe I didn't activate it. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye, thank you.
Any other? Okay. I'll see you guys on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bert, just curious, on that video, on the UN